Okay, I meant to do this video a while back, about 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's about Jay Inslee. He's the Democrat candidate from the state of Washington. He's the governor there. He wants to be the candidate for president to run against Donald Trump. Basically his campaign is centered around climate change, which I think is probably the worst, weakest, most nonsensical thing to base a presidential platform on. But this is what's polling well with Democrats at the moment. Anyway, let's see what he's got to say on the issue.
I'm Jay Inslee, and we know we have to make 2020 a referendum on climate change. Look, we're facing a catastrophe. We need bold, aggressive action now. But Donald Trump's disastrous agenda is increasing the danger. We know we need a carbon-free, 100% clean energy economy. We need to build a new economy based on millions of clean energy jobs.
Yeah.
Our future depends on an urgent, all-in commitment to fight climate change. If you agree with me,
Yeah, I
join
do.
this fight. Demand that 2020 be a referendum on climate change. Thanks.
You're welcome, dude. Thanks a lot. You're gonna be great. Okay, so let's check out the governor's website. Let's see what he's got to say. Inslee expands drought emergency for nearly half of the state. Governor Jay Inslee expanded the drought emergency declaration to cover nearly half of Washington state due to worsened poor water supply conditions around the state and warmer and drier weather predictions through the summer. Snowpack conditions are currently less than 50% of average for this time of year. Washington State Department of Ecology experts expect the warmer, drier weather will cause the already diminished snowpack to melt more quickly, reducing water availability this summer when it is needed most for farms, communities, and fish. Despite this past week's rainfall totals for the state remain below normal. Okay, as you can see by the AP, he's got the message out. Governor declares drought for nearly half of Washington state, blah, 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 blah. Okay, but is there any pushback? Let's take a look. And here we have an article by Jason Rantz, and he quotes Cliff Mass, professor of atmospheric science at the University of Washington, who blogged, "The situation is far less dire or unusual than advertised. There will be plenty of water for nearly all users, and the forecast is for a wetter than normal summer." Mass took a deep dive into the data and found that while conditions in vulnerable areas of the state, east of the Cascade Crest, were clearly drier than normal over our normally sodden coast. However, he says for the rest of western Washington, it's been modestly below normal. That's precipitation. In fact, he says that overall it's wetter than normal this year. Also, he mentions after reviewing the Palmer Drought Index, the latest USDA soil moisture report shows above normal soil moisture for the state. In conclusion, Mass calls the scary talk about low snowpack as highly deceptive, and that it's not that bad over Washington state because in part the snowpack situation is not unusual in an El Nino year. That's a hotter than usual Pacific Ocean current, which alters the weather somewhat. Mass concludes that there is nothing exceptional going on. Yeah, I see. Well, just to be sure, let's take a look at the drought.gov website. And here we have the current state of affairs, which is for this. There's 5 echelons. There's the abnormally dry, moderate drought, severe drought, extreme drought, and exceptional drought. Okay, in this regard, 27% of the state is abnormally dry, 33% of the state is in a state of moderate drought, and 11% is in a state of severe drought. Now, severe drought does sound pretty awful, and it probably is to a degree. If you have crop or pasture loss, likely water shortages will be common, water restrictions will be imposed. That's 11% of the state so far. It may get worse during the summer, it may not, depends on the precipitation. But anyway, that's how it stands at the moment. However, Echelon 4, or what they call D3, extreme drought, that's 0% of the state is in a state of extreme drought, and 0% is in a state of exceptional drought. Oh yeah, and before I forget, I left this little bit out here. If we look at the amount of drought over the years, okay, back in the year 2000, you've got basically no drought. In 2002, you've got serious drought. 2003, you've got a little bit of drought. 2004, you got moderate drought. 2005, you got basically no drought. 2006, you've got serious drought. 2007, you've got a tiny bit of drought. 2008, you've got moderate drought. 2009, you've got a little bit of drought. 2010, you've got moderate drought. 2011, you got no drought. 2012, you got a tiny little bit of drought. 2012, you got a little bit of drought. 2014, you got a little bit of drought. 2015, you've got moderate drought. 2016, you've got serious drought. 2017, you got moderate drought. 2018, you got a little bit to no drought. drought. In 2019, you've got moderate drought. So in other words, this is not some kind of existential threat to the state at this time. It really is not, despite the governor's, what was he doing here? Inslee expands drought emergency for nearly half of the state. Staying on the same website, we go to just a different web page, and here we have the Palmer Drought Index itself for long-term meteorological conditions, June 2019 through June 8th. Well, anyways, through June 8th of 2019. As you can see, Washington State is, you've got some severe drought, you've got some moderate drought. Okay, however, for the rest of the country, moderate drought is like, I don't know, is this what's that, North Dakota maybe? Here, maybe I'm guessing it's Arizona, a little bit in Georgia, but the rest of the country is basically either mid-range, either normal, precipitation, or moisture in the soil, whatever. And then everywhere else is basically moderately moist, very moist, or extremely moist. And the area of the country which is extremely moist is actually quite significant if you look at it. I mean, it's just, in some, the country is not in a state of drought. There's no crisis of any kind. It's just complete baloney. To reinforce what I'm saying, let's hear Tony Heller, whom I listen to. Again, I don't trust most of the usual crowd of anthropological global warming hype people, because I don't trust a word they say. Basically, it's not even, you don't even have to look at the science, which you can look at and pull apart, and you'll find there are all kinds of flaws. I won't get into it. But the other thing you can do is just, look at predictions, for example. The Cromer at NASA back in, 1988, he was predicting that parts of Manhattan were going to be underwater, that the ecology is going to be replaced, instead of, let's say, deciduous forest and sparrows and crows and whatnot, it was going to be replaced by stuff like flamingos and palm trees. Did any of this happen? No, it's complete BS. I mean, they just, prediction after prediction after prediction is just wrong, 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 and wrong. Anyway, so let's check out Tony Heller.
Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about climate. The U.S. is experiencing an historically cool and wet period. The meteorological water year begins on October 1st, and the period from October 1st until the present has been the wettest on record in the United States. This map from NOAA shows that almost the entire country has been above normal precipitation since October 1st, much of it far above normal. October to May precipitation in the United States has been increasing since the 19th century, and this year it blew away all records. It's also been the coolest on record since October 1st, as I'll show you in the next few graphs. As you can see, more than 2/3 of the United States has been below normal temperature since October 1st, much of it far below normal. The percentage of days above 60 degrees Fahrenheit since October 1st is at a record low this year, far below 1934. And you can see that there's been a pretty steady downward trend ever since then.
The year 1934 is prominent here because 1934 was the warmest year in the United States. The global warming freaks, the bozos, they'll all claim that the warmest year was 1998, but that's because the numbers have been jury-rigged.
Same story with 70-degree days. They've been declining since 1934, and this year is a record low. The average daily maximum temperature is also at a record low this year, just below 1899, although this may change as more data comes in from June. And as you can see, afternoon temperatures are down more than 6 degrees since 1934. Not surprisingly, with the cool and wet, the number of forest fires and burn acreage is also at an historic low. According to the National Interagency Fire Center, the number of forest fires has been declining steadily over the last decade, and this year...
That's obviously important because dudes, Inslee is claiming that it's drought conditions, so you're going to presume there's going to be forest fires and whatnot, whereas the actual case, particularly when it comes to the country as a whole, is exactly the opposite.
...is at a record low. Burn acreage is also at a record low this year. If we go back 90 years, we can see that burn acreage is way down in the United States, by about 80%. In 1930...
In other words, burn acreage peaked, at least in the 20th century, back in, let's say, 1928. I mean, if you read the news, you think that the spate of fires over the last few years was the worst ever, but it's not that's not the case at all.
The New York Times reported that there was a forest fire every 3 minutes in the United States, which burned almost 22 million acres. That's a lot. Compare that to the 300...
A forest fire every 3 minutes. Think about that.
60,000 acres which have burned so far this year. It's still early in the fire season, but during the 1930s, more than 100 times as many acres burned. And if we go back to pre-industrial times, about 145 million acres of forest burned each year. Typical year now is down about 90% from that. So how are climate alarmists reacting to the record cool, wet, and...
Yeah, guess. How are they reacting?
Low fire year. Well, they're saying the exact opposite. One day ago, wildfires, heat waves foreshadow what could be a perilous summer. The people behind this propaganda have a tremendous vested interest, and they'll never tell you the truth about anything.
Tell me about it.
I used to work as a wilderness ranger in northern New Mexico and understand that fire is an essential part of the forest cycle. There were massive forest fires in northern New Mexico and southern Colorado in 1890, which led to spectacular aspen groves growing up since then. Here's some video showing the long-term results of those fires.
And the yellow trees, those are the aspens, yeah. Oh my God. What a disaster. Good Lord. Alright, anyway, you get the idea, yeah. Okay, but Inslee, to round out the whole bandwagon, you can't just campaign on forest fires because there's a kind of an absence of forest fires. So of course he's got to get in on the whole flooding thing, that bandwagon, right? Which he did. Last month he was he had the Mississippi floods, and so he was down in Iowa. I'm reading here from the Daily Caller. Washington Democrat Governor Jay Inslee tweeted Tuesday that climate change is personal for Davenport, Iowa, which has seen historic flooding this year. Oh, I see. Well, let's check out what the bozos got to say on the issue.
Across the street, the clothing store, 2 doors down.
Oh, that music really touches my heartstrings.
Rushed down here, and within maybe 10 minutes, we had 3.5 feet of water here.
Wow.
Tuesday the
Wow! 2.5 feet of water. Wow! 4.5 feet of water. Wow! What's special about 3.5 feet of water? Who the hell knows?
30th was supposed to be
Nothing.
our opening day, which was
Wow.
the same day that
That was one of those kind of Joe Biden handshakes. You just kind of won't let go. Check that out. Yeah, check the. Ooh, yeah. Oh, get into it, baby. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Tuesday the 30th was supposed to be our opening day, which was
Wow.
the same day that the levee broke. I'd been doing a month's worth of training with my staff in preparation for Tuesday.
Did
We
all
had
those
already
jobs. How many jobs is that?
about 25.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
but it's not
Well, I'll give him credit. At least he's worried about jobs. For a Democrat, that's something.
just my staff. It's staff at the brewery across the street, the clothing store, 2 doors down.
If we don't fight the climate crisis, these floods are just going to keep coming over the tops of these barriers.
Yeah, they will, because the town doesn't have any flood barriers, doesn't have any levees, which I'll show you. That's why they're just going to keep coming over, because they've decided, as a matter of policy, not to erect flood barriers. He cherry-picked a city which doesn't have flood barriers or levees.
And they're just going to keep flooding out our businesses. And
Yeah, because they made a conscious decision to let this thing happen.
they're just going to keep taking people's lives. And with all that scientific reality,
It's policy reality, not scientific reality. It's been doing this for thousands of years. Thank you very much, Jay.
it's threatening these.
The Mississippi floods, just like the Nile floods. Okay, it's what it does. The river levels rise every year, and they flood every year. And because they have no levees, and of course it's going to flood every year, which is what it does.
People, we got a guy in the White House who are telling us that the climate crisis is a Chinese hoax. This is a president.
Yeah, that was kind of funny. And the Chinese, of course, blame the climate crisis on Americans. They think it's invented by the U.S. as a hoax, as an excuse to kind of put pressure on Chinese businesses.
Who's not helping these people one iota. He hasn't helped them on the disaster, and he hasn't helped them before the disaster to end the climate crisis.
Yes, because they don't want any help, because they voted not to build levees, as I've said. Good grief. Enough of this baloney. All right, I impugned the fine candidate's integrity by saying that he cherry-picked the city. Well, of course, I don't really know that he cherry-picked it, but you would presume that somebody who's campaigning on a anti-global warming plank would presumably he's going to look for the city which has got the worst flooding. And of course, the worst flooding, I presume, was Davenport, Iowa. And for good reason. And why would that be? Because it has a history. Davenport often makes national headlines when it suffers seasonal flooding by the Mississippi River. Why does it make these national headlines? Well, it's because it is the largest city bordering the Mississippi that has no permanent flood wall or levee. Davenport residents prefer to maintain open access to the river for parks and vistas rather than to have it cut off by dikes and levees. As a consequence, former Mayor Phil Yerington once said that if they let Mother Nature take her course, we'll all be better off. Basically, it's kind of two-pronged. And on the one hand, they want to have unrestricted access to the river because the vistas, and plus, I don't know, maybe they want to go fishing or God knows what they want to do. They have parks alongside the river, whatever. That's number one. Number two, the sewage system. The way it works is that when the river levels rise, it backs up into the sewer system, and so you'd have flooding behind the wall anyway, which in other words, they would have to not only erect levees, but they'd also have to totally revamp their sewer system, which would be extremely expensive, and I guess they decided that there wasn't in their interest to do so. As a consequence, it has a history of floods. For example, they had a great flood in 1993, right? There was also a 2008 flood, and there was also more flooding in 1990, right? And so on and so forth. And this is all part of a pattern. Because, for example, the Mississippi, it tends to flood now and again. For example, there was a flood of March 1543. Yes, that's correct. That's 1543 when Hernando de Soto was monkeying around. There's the flood of 1734, 1788, 1809, 1825, 1844, 1851, 1874, 1882, 1927. Do you get the feeling that global warming is not behind all these floods? And then there's the floods of 1937, 1945, 1965, 1973, 1975, 1979, 1983, 1993, 2002, 2008, 2011, 2014, 2017, 2019. Right? Was global warming to blame back in, what was it, 1543? Or the 1700s? Or even the 1800s? You know what I'm saying? Come on, this is just malarkey. But hey, don't worry. Hopeful Inslee says he has a $9 trillion climate plan that will boost the economy. Well, that's great news. I mean, considering one of today's news stories, which is that the United States, even with the second highest tax revenues ever collected in the first 8 months of the fiscal year, the federal government still ran a deficit for those 8 months of $738 billion. Right? I mean, the government's in debt, and how much? I mean, it depends when it comes to what's that other thing? The unfunded liabilities. I mean, it's $100 to $200 trillion in debt. And our hero says he wants to spend another $9 trillion, or at least he has a $9 trillion climate plan, within which I'm sure probably at least half is government spending, probably more. I mean, it's just insane. Spend, spend, spend. And don't worry, clean energy. It'll save the day. Why? Well, look at how well it's doing so far. Okay, I don't even believe these statistics. I'm sure there are other monkeyed around with anyway, as it is. But let's say they're real. They're legit. Renewable energy, according to Wikipedia, accounted for 12% of the total primary energy consumption. 12%. And half of that is hydroelectric power. Is hydropower going to power most of the United States? You know, the Dakotas, you know... wherever. I mean, how the hell is that supposed to work? You know, there's not nearly enough hydropower to do this. Wind power is like, you know, half of it as well. So wind power is 5.5% of total power production, as you can see here. I mean, this is not even close to being mature in terms of, if you had renewable energy, if it was already accounting for, let's say, above 50% of the nation's needs, then maybe you could talk about expanding it in some serious way. But right now it's 12%. How are you going to jump? 12%. How are you going to amplify that up to 100% with some $9 trillion spending plan? I mean, come on, this is just foolishness. You know, and let's get into another thing. According to the climate warming or global warming fanatics, as the climate heats up, there's going to be more and more droughts, and okay, let's follow that hypothesis. If there are more and more droughts, then how are we going to solve problems with hydropower? Obviously, not going to work because if you have more and more droughts, you have less water, you have less, right? But of course, this also brings us back to a fundamental error in that the global warming fanatics make. What happens is when the temperature rises, if you actually really had genuine global warming, which I wish we really would have, that would be terrific. But if you really did have it, then what that would mean was that the oceans would rise in temperature, which would mean you'd have more evaporation, which would mean you'd have more water vapor in the air, which would mean you'd have more rain, more precipitation, which would mean you'd have less drought, which means you would have less desert, which means you'd have more growth, you would have more rapid forest growth, the deserts, whether they be in the United States, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, or whether it be the Sahara, which would shrink and perhaps even completely disappear, right? This would be a boon for the world, right? But instead, of course, it's being pitched as being some kind of disaster. So again, one more time, if the disaster prophecy is for real, in other words, if these climate warming idiots know what they're talking about, then hydropower cannot work. Right? And if I'm right, then hydropower, of course, will work. But if I'm right, that's because they don't understand global warming, which, of course, they do not. And then there's a phenomenon of global wind speed dropping, wind farms being victim of atmospheric stilling. Okay? The gist of this is a paper from Science Direct, Science, blah, 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 blah. An abstract says, using an observed data set, we studied the changes of surface wind speeds from 1979 through 2016 over the northern hemisphere and their impacts on wind power potential. And you can just see from the graphs that the wind speeds are steadily in decline. Not so much in North America, but in Europe, definitely on the incline, on the decline. Asia, globally, right? I mean, we can debate on the whys and wherefores of this, but if this is legit, and apparently it is, then we're in a real problem. Relying on wind power to increasingly power the nation, right? And then there's the problem with hydropower. You would think this would be obvious anyway, because I mean, anybody who's familiar with the Greens knows that they hate dams. All kinds of people hate dams. Also sportsmen, people who like fishing for salmon and the like. They don't like hydropower projects either because they block the ability of fish to go upstream. So the Greens, the environmentalists hate dams because again they stop wildlife. Sportsmen, they don't like dams because they stop wildlife. There's already a lot of built-in opposition, and it comes from other people as well. I mean, let's check this out here. Opposition from NIMBY, not in my backyard, groups continues to slow down development of hydropower projects. Although hydropower plants are a source of complete renewable energy and employ around 300,000 workers in the United States and are responsible for about 7% of total United States electricity, well, according to Wikipedia, it's about 5.5, but anyway, I think it's 5.5. Oh, no, maybe it's 6.5, sorry. Further hydropower development continues to be faced with resistance. In Aspen, Colorado, debates about a hydropower project, for example, have divided the town for the past 6 years, with voters narrowly rejecting the most recent proposal by less than 150 votes last November. Now, this is 2013. Even though the dam would help Aspen towards its goal of becoming a completely renewable energy-run town, locals are concerned about the ecological impact. This is what you encounter over and over again. They're worried about the ecological impact that a hydroelectricity plant may have on the impacted region, and they're unsure about the pros and cons of the project. But bigger than just the local issue, this problem, according to this article, is not just apparent in the United States, but around the world as well. Which then brings us to 2016 article, popularity of big hydropower projects diminishes around the world. Again, no surprise to anybody that has a brain that works. Earlier this year, in an announcement that has become more routine around the world, Sui Sem, Cambodia's Minister of Mines and Energy, declared a moratorium on the construction of big hydropower dams until at least 2020. How do I get rid of this sticker here? The country's decision to halt new dams follows rising distress in Southeast Asia over the financial, ecological, and social consequences of building big and expensive hydropower projects, especially on the Mekong River and its tributaries. Cambodia joins a lengthening list of nations around the world that are reassessing big hydropower dams. So there we have it. The blowhard can go on and on as much as he likes about using climate change as his central plank of his candidacy for the Democrat Party's nomination as the guy to go against Trump. But the facts of the matter are, climate is not a real issue. It's not going to solve any real problems. I mean, I can't even concentrate looking at this moron howling at me. It just doesn't work for a whole host of reasons. There is no real. Oh, thank God I stopped playing. God, it was annoying. There is no real climate crisis right now in Washington State. There's a certain amount of drought, but his statements are overwrought. The town that he visited in Iowa, where he claimed that they were suffering terrible flooding, there was some 3.5-foot rise in water. At some point, which is supposed to wow us as an audience listening to this. This is a town which has flooding every year because it floods every year when the river rises as a natural process because it doesn't have levees in place. So he probably cherry-picked the town to facilitate his political ambitions. When you look into hydropower, nobody wants it. I mean, it's a great idea in principle, but nobody wants it, right? Nobody in their local area. Wind power potentially is on the decline because global wind speeds are on the decline. Probably something to do with the temperature going down. The global temperature is not going up; it's going down. If you look at the real numbers, the raw data, not the fixed, manufactured, fiddled with data, which is what you get from NASA and all the rest of it. When you look at the raw data, the temperature of the planet is actually in decline. It has been in decline more or less for about 6,000 years. Anyway, I decided to make this video just to point out some of the imbecilities in this guy's campaign. just get this off my chest. Anyway, I hope I said something useful. If you like what you saw, please hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.